And gentlemen, thank you for being with us this afternoon, and especially since it's a holiday. I will let my colleague Vidur take over the introduction and invite Excellency and Nirupama to the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. We'll just wait for them to take the dice. Once again, good evening and welcome to the Ananta Center. Today, we have a special program under the Ambassador Series titled India-Sri Lanka Relations, Promoting Connectivity, Catalysing Prosperity. This series is a unique platform for interactions with the heads of foreign missions in India and Indian missions abroad. We are honored to have with us His Excellency, Mr. Milinda Moragoda, who is the High Commissioner of Sri Lanka to India. He will be our speaker today. A very warm welcome, High Commissioner. It is also my pleasure to welcome Ms. Nirupama Subramanian. She's an independent journalist writing on India's foreign policy. Between 1996 and 2002, she was the Colombo-based Sri Lanka correspondent for the Indian Express and the Hindu successively. Before we begin, a request to our viewers on Facebook, please send in your questions throughout the course of the discussion rather than waiting for the end. You can send your questions through the chat box, the comment section. With this, over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Vidur, and thank you, Ananta Center and Indrani, for inviting me to chair this session of the Ambassador Series. Sri Lanka is very close to my heart. I've been immersed in the Sri Lanka story and its journey since the time I started covering it in 1995. So it always feels good to participate in any discussion on it and to get to know more about it. And what better person than High Commissioner Milinda Moragoda, who has led these relations with India over the last 3 years. It's been a very difficult time for Sri Lanka. The title of today's discussion is Promoting Connectivity, Catalyzing Prosperity. It's also the title of the Economic Partnership Vision, the official bilateral document that came out of President Ranil Wickremesinghe's Delhi visit in July, a month ago. A year to the day that he was elected president under extraordinary circumstances in Sri Lanka. We're all familiar with those circumstances, and I will just rush through it in any case. To say that it was a tumultuous 2 years would be an understatement. Massive, massive people's movement, mostly non-violent from the side of the participants, against the economic hardships that had begun to tell in 2021. Then the loud demand for political change, then a louder demand for system change. It kept evolving. Then the dramatic scenes of tens of thousands of people entering the official residence of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, his fleeing the country. Then Ranil Wickremesinghe elected as president by the Rajapaksa party, which is the Sri Lanka Podujana Perumuna. Wickremesinghe then leads the talks with the IMF. A bailout package of $2.9 billion is negotiated, and now the long road to recovery. This period has also seen India undertake a number of economic and strategic collaborations in Sri Lanka, which are reflected in the vision document. In fact, I have to say the vision document is very much like your integrated country strategy, which you presented to the president in 2020, I think, as you took over. And there's a lot of that in the vision document. So, I mean, I think your 3 years have been a success in that sense. The document envisages different kinds of connectivity over land, air, and water. And the most ambitious, perhaps, a land bridge connecting the two countries between Rameshwaram and Talaimanar in Tamil Nadu. Rameshwaram is in Tamil Nadu, and Talaimanar in Sri Lanka. There's also financial connectivity, energy connectivity, which also includes an ambitious plan to lay undersea pipelines to transfer oil and gas quickly to Sri Lanka. And who knows if Trincomalee becomes an energy hub as you have envisaged it one day, then the flow could be in the reverse direction too. I mean, from a refinery there to India. Let me also recall here what President Wickremesinghe said in an interview last year in the context of the India-China rivalry in the South Asian and in the Indian Ocean region. India is the net security provider in the region, and all other countries can also be present as long as it does not lead to rising tensions or increased rivalry between states. And that Sri Lanka has to manage to deal with all this, because this is the new reality. Having been in Delhi since 2020, High Commissioner Moragoda is one of the few persons who knows every details of the negotiations between India and Sri Lanka that fast-tracked Delhi's quick response to bail out Sri Lanka starting in March last year. From what little I know of it as a journalist, it's a fascinating story. And who knows, High Commissioner Moragoda, you may one day write a book telling us what went on behind the scenes, because all my pleas to tell me about it have failed. Because, and also he's a prolific writer, apart from all the other different hats he wears: diplomat, politician. He's been an elected member of parliament, and I remember covering his 2001 election, sitting in the back of his car trying to take down notes in the dark as we spoke. It's really a privilege that he is with us today to share with us his insights on Sri Lanka and the trajectory of India-Sri Lanka relations. I will now hand over to High Commissioner Moragoda for him to make his opening remarks, and then we can have the question and answer after that.
Thank you, Nirupama. Thank you, Indran, for this invitation, and for the Ananta Center for the invitation. I would prefer that we do this in a more discussion mode rather than me talking for too long. You expect me to speak for 10 minutes, or that work for you?
Yeah, but it can be as long as,
okay.
Not longer than 10 minutes, but
okay.
as short as you like.
So if I go too long, just because I'm speaking off of notes, so I can take it whichever way. Firstly, as I said, thank you, and thank you all for coming on what is a holiday, so I really appreciate that. Basically, I'm going to focus on the economic relationship. So what I'm not going to talk about now is one on the geopolitics, and the other is on the reconciliation aspect. I'm happy to discuss it during the discussion stage, and I'm sure there will be discussion, but I will focus on the economic relationship. Basically, the economic relationship, at least from my perspective, and Sri Lanka's economy has to be taken in the context of 30 years of war, then a war of different sorts, because we have also had insurrections in that period. So out of 75 years of independence, 30 years we have had that kind of turmoil. So that has to be understood. Then, of course, the Easter bombings of 2019, COVID, and then, of course, the Ukrainian conflict, as well as finally what happened last year. So it is through that we have to also understand that, and we should also understand that our youth, who should have been contributing to development, were actually fighting a war during the most critical period. Any society has a period for a demographic dividend. Our demographic dividend was really in the 80s and the 90s. Now we are actually entering an aging population. As you know, our population growth has been low. And as a consequence, we have, in a way, missed a very important period of our development. The basis of what was agreed between President Vikramasinghe and Prime Minister Modi when he was here, what we have called and what Nirupama referred to, also promoting connectivity, catalyzing prosperity, India, Sri Lanka economic partnership vision, was basically looking at how do we bring the two economies together. And before I get to detail of that, I will update you the process through which we arrived at this final conclusion, that it would be good to integrate the two economies. As Nirupama pointed out, India stepped in when our economic crisis struck. And I keep on repeating this at every forum, because if India had not intervened, the peaceful aspects of what you saw would not have been the case. It is India that actually prevented bloodshed. And the speed with which India entered the stabilization phase is something I keep repeating at every forum. Initially, India entered the process with money in various forms. I mean, there were loans, there was also supporting our balance of payments, which is sometimes which is missed, because nearly $2.1 billion of what was given out of the 3.9 billion was to meet our Asian Clearing Union requirements. And that was not a loan, that was just pumped in. And that enabled our economy to function, our imports to continue. Then after that, India took the lead in providing financing assurances when the debt restructuring was called for, before the Paris Club. Before anybody was willing to step up, India wrote the first letter. Parallelly to that, both Mrs. Sitharaman and Dr. Shankar spoke with the World Bank, the IMF, and also bilateral donors such as Japan, encouraging them to engage Sri Lanka. So it is through that process that we are at this stage today that Nirupama referred to. We were able to get into an agreement with the IMF and enter the stabilizing phase. But the price of stabilization is also very harsh, as you know. And our economy, by the end of this year, between last year, the last two years, would have shrunk by about 10%. You can imagine the pain that the poor and the low middle classes and the middle classes are feeling in Sri Lanka today. So that is where we have to address growth. We have to create jobs, we have to create incomes, we have to expand incomes. So it is in the growth phase that we look at this integration of Sri Lanka and India together on the economic side. Nirupama mentioned about our country strategy document. That document provided the contours, I think, for some of the areas that we addressed in the vision document. There we envisage 3 stages, what we call a transactional stage, then a strategic stage, and finally what we have referred to as a special relationship. I think we are somewhere between the transactional and the strategic now. We have still not come into the strategic phase, and that on the economic side, I think we are at the strategic phase. But I think on the rest of the other broader issues, we have to do more consultation on the strategic side. Now, why does this make sense? Because marketing this, even in Sri Lanka, sometimes is challenging. But I would like to try to explain it as I see it here. Firstly, the relationship between India and Sri Lanka is asymmetrical. I mean, one can't look at it as being an equal relationship when it comes to economics. We are both sovereign nations. We deal with each other equally in every context, but in the economic context, we have to understand that asymmetry. So, for example, we are an $80 billion economy. You are a $3.5 trillion economy. We have 22 million people. You have 1.4 billion people. Then, in language that businessmen understand, for example, our total generation of electricity in Sri Lanka is 4,300 megawatts. One of your companies, NTPC, would produce 70,000 megawatts a year. So our electricity supply maybe is not even enough to power one of your smaller cities. Then, although we have potential, we have nearly 30,000 megawatts of wind energy potential off the northwestern coast of Sri Lanka. So, that's where the logic comes, the fit comes in. When it comes to petroleum, you mentioned the idea of an energy hub in Trincomalee. We use 150,000 barrels of petroleum a day. You use 5 million. You are growing at a pace where I think by 2030, your requirement might grow by even 50% of what you have now. Your refining capacity may be 1/3 more you may require. So can't trinkably be linked with Sri Lanka. So that's the logic of integration. These are just some sectors. I can talk about many more if you want during the discussion. Then also to explain our economy. Our economy is very easy to understand, frighteningly so. Our main source of income, remittances, $7.5 billion at peak. It has dropped now. Pre-COVID, at peak was $7.5 billion of remittances from the Middle East and elsewhere of Sri Lankans working. Next comes apparel, mostly exports to the US, $5 billion, of which we add value 1/3, 2/3 we import. Then we have tea, which everybody talks about, which occupies a fair extent of our land in the hill country. It's only just under $2 billion. That's our export of tea. And IT services, around 1 billion. Potential is there, but it's still at that point. Then comes the wild card, tourism. We have never been able to realize the full potential of tourism. Our peak was 2018. We believe we would have made about $4 billion on tourism. Easter Sunday attacks took place in 2009. It just came down. And then COVID, and that's how it worked. So tourism has tremendous potential. And if you look at the last few months, even last year, 20% or more of tourists coming to Sri Lanka coming from India. So there again comes the connection. Then one has to, I think, look at the other aspect, which is how did we get into this crisis? And I use some numbers just to make it, maybe explain it a little bit. Before COVID, 80% of our revenue, that is government revenue, was spent on salaries for government servants and pensions, 80%. So we had only 20% for anything else. 22 million people, we have nearly 1.5 million working for government, 500,000 drawing pensions from government, which is funded. We have no pension fund, straight from the budget. So nearly 2 million people are basically working with the government out of a 22 million population. Then when it came towards the crisis, 75% of our revenues we were spending on interest payments alone, just on interest. That's where the debt crisis came in, because we just couldn't make it. I mean, you begin the year, 80% you are spending on government service, and they're making it overly simple here, but 75% on interest. So there came the crisis. On the other side, 7% of our GDP comes from agriculture. 7%. 25% of our workforce are working in agriculture. So that is, again, another challenge that we have. So the question is, this is what we have to start now looking at. How do we change the structure? It's a very simple economy to understand. And how do we broaden the sources of income? And India becomes key in that aspect. So there we work on, through this process of integration, we are talking of connectivity, economic integration, and investment. Connectivity sectors we can look at: ports. 80% of Sri Lanka's Colombo ports business is transshipment. 75% of that goes to India. So we basically service India as a port. We can keep expanding it as you grow. We are negative 10% now growth. You are growing but 6.5. So, you know, there is so much potential. Electricity through this cable linkage. Then we are talking of the oil pipeline. So these are areas we can integrate. And I think during Ashok's time also some of these things were discussed when he was High Commissioner. Then we have ferry services, air services. That's all mentioned in the vision document. And of course, the physical connectivity is a vision to make this all, you know, seem to people to understand that we are not really far from each other. So if we achieve this, potentially we can become, let's say, I sometimes say the Netherlands of this region. Rotterdam is the largest port in Europe and servicing Europe. Netherlands is a distribution center of Europe. Easily we can aspire to that. So that is really the aspirational goal on the connectivity. When it comes to economic integration, trade, now we have decided to renew, both leaders agreed to renew discussions on trade. And India will be soon appointing a negotiator. We have already appointed a negotiator. Hopefully they will start that process to go beyond the FTA that we have now. Then, of course, rupee trade for tourism, especially, that should help, where people can travel, because tourism is going to be, in the short term, we hope, the silver bullet. But of course, that requires social stability. Lastly comes investment in these three areas, and that is, we need investment from India. We already have some significant investments. Adani Ports is investing in a port there. ITC has invested around $500 million in probably what will be one of the most, I think, their first major development outside India, the hotel, which is, so that is hopefully will be open end of this year. I think again started during High Commissioner Ashok Kanta's time. So there are, there is potential like that. So the investments would be the other. So connectivity, economic integration, investments. The other aspect is what we would like to see is trilateral cooperation. We are looking at, can India and Japan work together to jointly invest in Sri Lanka? Can India, UAE, or India, Saudi? So because especially if you are developing Trinco into a energy hub, can Saudi Arabia, maybe UAE, because they are making big investments here, can they also work? So that's another area we would like to explore. Of course, what are the challenges to this? Clearly, we are a polarized society. I think Rupama lived through that. She understands that. And so did Ashok. We are a democracy. So, okay, can we make that happen within that framework? The other area, I think, is geopolitics. Will geopolitics get in the way? How are we going to manage that? Both countries, both Sri Lanka and India. And also, how do we address history? Because everything has to do with history. We are all conditioned by history. I think Winston Churchill was once asked, when he was asked about something, his response was, study history, study history, study history. In history lie all the secrets of statecraft. And we have a history from Ramayana to today between India and Sri Lanka. And I always feel we have to study that, both from the Ramayana up to today, study and learn. Because, I mean, we should not be looking back and troubling. We should obviously look forward. But I think we need to study that and understand it. Some of us have lived through parts of it, but obviously nobody has lived through it since Ramayana. But it's good to, I think, read and learn. Anyway, I think I took over 10 minutes. So I don't know how long I took, but anyway, thank you for being patient. Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for those very reflective thoughts on India-Sri Lanka relations and Sri Lanka's own situation. I'll set the ball rolling with, we'll come to the vision document, but my first question, I really want to ask you to tell us about the economic situation now, because we hear that probably the worst is over, but there are challenges because there are all the conditionalities to be met, the IMF conditionalities. So what is the situation now? There aren't any visible, there's no visible distress in the sense of the queues for petrol, the shortages are not visible, but there are people who have sunk below the poverty line, 7 million people below the poverty line, as against, I think it was 3 million earlier, and now it's 7 million. So would you just bring us up to speed on what the situation exactly is right now?
Well, I think we are going through what is called a stabilization phase. And to stabilize, we needed to stop paying our debt. So we have that headroom. But that will, after we are renegotiating the debt at the moment. And hopefully by the end of the year, we would be able to do that. Our president is personally leading that effort. And that it's a challenging effort because we have to deal with bilateral sovereign loan debt creditors, private creditors, so that process is going on. But that has given us a certain an ability at least to manage affairs because we don't have to pay these big installments. Inflation has been brought under control. But I mean, economists always use the number, but very often what happens is the inflation is brought under control by compressing demand. And this technical term, demand compression, I find to be one of the most heartless terminologies in economics, because what it really means is people don't have money to be able to buy what they want. And that's where the poverty factor comes in. So this has affected the middle class very badly. Of course, the poor are always affected. But this is part of the stabilization process. And there is calm, but obviously people are hoping something will happen. I mean, because everybody is living in expectation. So tourism is a short-term hope that everybody is having, that there will be more tourists. So India, clearly, we would like to see that happen from India. We need more investment. We need also restructuring of certain sectors, like the petroleum sector, the electricity sector, because there's another word we use when economists use, cost recovery. So now we are recovering cost on electricity, we are recovering cost on water. The cost of generating electricity in Sri Lanka is about twice, if not 3 times the price of generating a unit in India. So unless we create competitiveness and try to bring the price down, cost recovery is on its own is not the answer, but clearly we have to find other solutions. So we have to create competition, we have to create investments in that sector. So that is something the president himself is working on. In the petroleum sector already that deregulation is going on, and Indian Oil is the main, next to Sri Lanka Petroleum, Indian Oil is the largest distributor. There are others that have come in, including Sinopec now. There are some, Shell has come in, and also an Australian company. So there are 3 other players. So there is competition there, which is good. So the challenges are many. The IMF review, the first review will take place in September. What I explained to you about our heavy government service, the cost of running government has led to high taxation now. Obviously we have to find the money somewhere. So the taxes have gone up significantly, which is affecting the middle class again. Earlier we were focusing more on indirect taxes, and that was felt to be unfair. So there is now more focus on direct taxes. But then the question is, is this going to be enough? So we will see by September when the IMF comes for the review whether we have done enough. Towards the end of the year, we will know the result of the debt restructuring. But there is a certain calm at the moment, calm with expectation. So the challenge for our political leaders is to deliver. And we have elections possibly coming up next year. So the pressure is on.
Sri Lanka, in many ways, Sri Lanka has been, in the region, it has been a model state in terms of its social security measures, in education, in health. So how is all this going to be affected, you think, as you implement all these belt tightening measures and the conditionalities? We already see that there is this distress and also the fears that Sri Lanka might remove some of those social security nets. How true are those fears? Would you be able to throw some light on that?
We are, as you know, we are proud of what we have achieved since independence. I mean, the critique and the narrative I laid out in my presentation was more the negative side, but on the positive side, we have made investments way beyond what a country of our economy would be able to make. But
you eradicated malaria.
Exactly. So we can be proud. Our literacy rate, we can be proud of. But now the time has come to actually pay the piper, so to speak, because we have been, not been able to earn to do all these things. So yes, now there is an effort to restructure our safety net. At one stage, nearly half our population was receiving some kind of welfare or the other. Okay, the targeting, again, these economic terms are, targeting sounds nice, but when you actually have to do it on the ground, only you realize the human aspect of this. Maybe these things should have been done when the economy was not hurting as much, because now when you try to do this, clearly you are depriving people who still will probably need this. So that's the challenge the government has, that is happening at the moment, an effort to target this. The World Bank has come up with proposals to give some funding for that, provided the targeting is done. There have been protests about it as well. So
Yeah.
it's not an easy process. It's not an easy process because, I mean, I tried to outline what our economy looks like. Unless we can broaden the areas of income, unless we can either focus on restructuring government, this is going to continue to be a problem for us, because we just don't have enough sources of income to be able to live the way we have been living so far.
I think the other big challenge is going to be to, the big public sector or state-owned enterprises, as you call them, Sri Lankan Airlines, the Ceylon Electricity Board, all these are going to be privatized shortly. I mean, they have to be privatized, is what President Wickremesinghe announced way back in his budget. But there is a big pushback from the unions against it, and there's a lot of unrest on the ground about it. How is President Wickremesinghe going to deal with it? As you mentioned, elections are coming up. So is this even doable?
Well, I mean, crises can create opportunities, and that's how one has to view it. I mean, 2001, I was the minister in charge of economic reform, and I was responsible for privatization. And that is a time when we brought in Indian Oil, for example, as a second player. None of this is easy, because the vested interests are right across the board. And when you have a government of nearly 2 million people, within 22 million population, it is a very, very strong vested interest. So, but then to some extent, what happened last year seems to have softened some areas. So there is a flexibility. But as we get close to an election, it changes. So, I mean, I can't predict that now. I mean, I would like to hope that we can push this along, but I think it's fraught with challenges.
Will elections be held? I mean, there's a fear that elections might not be held.
I think that is, I think, also a political stance. No, I mean, our presidential election has to take place somewhere between August and around November next year. That's in the constitution. So, no, I think, I mean, Sri Lanka, I mean, you've served there, you know how conspiracy theories and, the general way we work. But finally, you've been there. I mean, we have had elections, governments have changed. Sometimes when we have thought governments cannot be removed, they have changed. I mean, that is, I think, since 1931, we have been managing that, I think, okay, I think so that will happen.
You mentioned when you spoke about India-Sri Lanka relations, you said they were somewhere in between the transactional and the strategic partnership kind of level. And looking at the vision document and the way it has, the way it has been received in Sri Lanka, one gets the feeling that on the ground, people still think of it as a transactional relationship. And, just going by the pushback against the privatization of the state-owned enterprises, there's one line in the vision document which says that, Indian investment in some of these enterprises, maybe, I think they probably mean Sri Lankan airlines. Probably there is an Indian interest in Sri Lankan airlines. So how does this go down in, among the Sri Lankan public? I mean, what is the view there? Because I was reading something recently by Dayan Jayatilaka, who has said that this is an invasion. This is now going to be annexed by India. Sri Lanka is going to be annexed by India. For those who don't know, Dayan Jayatilaka was also a former diplomat. He was permanent representative at Geneva. He's been many things, but the last was that he was a diplomat at Geneva, permanent rep at Geneva. So how does this go down actually? This
No, but
vision.
clearly, I think we have many voices, as you do here. I mean, I don't think there is total agreement on everything. And I think for a country of 22 million people, we have 22 million voices. Because if we spoke in one voice, probably we would not be where we are today in many ways. And we have strong opinions. You served there, you know that. On the investment side, the reference is not particularly to Sri Lankan Airlines. It is in general areas where there will be synergies and complementarities. I mean, if you look at in the infrastructure sector, whether it's oil, whether it's electricity, whether it is ports, whether it's airports, whether it's aviation, there is very clear synergy and complementarity. So where there is that, we would obviously like to encourage Indian investment because it makes sense for the very reasons I explained at the beginning, because there is this fit. So that is what it refers to. Ideologically, when it comes to private sector privatization, I mean, the default position of many Sri Lankans is suspicion of that. There is no doubt about it. And having served as a minister in charge of privatization and lost a fair number of votes having tried to implement it, I know what people think. But at the end of the day, I think we have to do what we think is right. And this crisis, I think, opened out some opportunities. And I think a lot of what Mr. Wickremesinghe has managed to do in the last year would not have been, even what Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa might manage to do towards the end of his term, would not have been possible if there was no crisis, interestingly. So therefore, I think even going to the IMF, I mean, there was a huge debate. I mean, people like myself openly advocated going to the IMF. It's part of the discussion with Delhi right from the start. But in Colombo, there was a whole cacophony of voices on that. So therefore, I think there are some opportunities, and then we will have our election, and then we have to see. I mean, if the mandate is fragmented in a parliamentary election, democracy is democracy. We have to listen to that. But one hopes that the population would understand. But having spent, I mean, as you know, I spent nearly 10 years in parliament, and my ideology, by and large, the same. It's not easy to convince people, that I know that.
So, I mean, this is, I don't know if this can be answered, but I just wonder sometimes that what must India do to convince Sri Lanka or Sri Lankans that, it's not looking entirely transactionally at this relationship? What is it that India is missing here? Is India missing something, or is it something in Sri Lanka that it will always look at this big neighbor with suspicion and think of it as, a possible colonizer that will extract everything, that it's an extractive relationship?
No, I don't. I mean, what happened last year, I think there are many Sri Lankans who appreciate and are grateful for what happened, because, I mean, Indian oil, which was a brand on the ground, saved many people. So it was visible. At the same time, in a family, elder brother, younger brother, elder sister, younger sister, there are rivalries, and especially the younger sister feels or brother feels in a certain way. So that reality is there, given the asymmetry of the relationship. In my view, what I have tried to do here on the cultural side is to explain to Sri Lankans and to the Indians that I don't know to what extent I'm succeeding, but the civilizational connection goes across everything. I mean, what we have our same DNA, India and Sri Lanka. There is no doubt. I mean, Indians and Sri Lankans, depending on which part of the India you're dealing with, we have more connections than to others. So that is one aspect of it, I think. The other is the DNA is the same, civilizationally we are the same, and geographically we have nowhere else to go. I mean, other countries are too far away. Our economy cannot develop without integrating with India. So there are different voices to that, and some are louder than others. And I find in democracies, majorities are very quiet. Majority meaning in the context of a democratic majority, people are quiet. And I'm hoping that, I don't think India needs to do more. I mean, it's difficult because I think when you deal with a giant, generally the giant thinks less of about what they are doing, and you just by mistake, would you put your hand out, you knock somebody down. So probably you can be a bit more sensitive. I mean, that's one aspect. But I think what I find is talking to each other more. And there, I think the people-to-people relationship is the most important thing. If I had to do one thing, I would try to ensure that every school child in Sri Lanka at least gets one visit to India in his or her lifetime. If we are able to do that in 2 to 3 generations, this problem will get resolved. Because whenever I have found, I don't know whether we can do it the other way, obviously not, but this way, people will understand how much they have in common. You visit Kerala, it's like the south of Sri Lanka, you know that.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't see a difference. So my view is the people-to-people side. That connection is what we can do. And that cannot be done by governance and catalyze, but at the next level, it has to happen. With the government side, I think it is a dialogue between leaders. Now, this time when Mr. Wickramasinghe came here, our strategy was to ensure maximum time between leaders to make sure that they were able to talk privately to each other, to build that confidence and trust. Because, I mean, there will be difficult situations that come forward that they can deal with each other. So that trust building process has to be there. But among the people, I think it is the people-to-people links. Yes, and that is not going to happen tomorrow. It will take time.
You know, I know that you said that you're not going to, you're going to focus on the economic issues. But, you know, one of the spoilers, potential spoilers, is geopolitics. So how should we see Sri Lanka's relationship, or should we call it dependencies, on China? There was a ship last year that, you know, that came at the beginning of President Wickramasinghe's tenure, and there's going to be another ship now this October, I think, or November, I don't know. It's going to a Chinese research ship, and so how do we see this? Because this is clearly a sensitive matter from the point of view of India. India is locked in adversarial relations with China. There's an issue at the LAC. There's a military standoff. We haven't yet resolved that. How should we see something of this nature? I mean, a close relationship with China at the southern tip. You know, could you talk about this? Yeah.
Well, firstly, I mean, you made the point in your presentation also, Mr. Wickramasinghe, and even our former President Rajapaksa has been very clear that that India is the security provider in this region. And I have always said that India's security is our security, and the other way around, obviously. So therefore, that is one aspect of this. When issues arise, which it is likely to continue given the nature of the competition that is taking place today, we have to communicate. And I think, at least during my tenure, what I have tried to achieve is to encourage our leaders to communicate. Diplomats can communicate, that I don't think makes much of a difference sometimes. But at the leadership level, to have that communication. And that is happening. In every context, it is happening. So finally, I think these will get resolved through that process. That's how it has to happen. Last year, we went through a very difficult period. This ship arrived in the middle of that crisis. This year, there are some similar situations arising, and there is a dialogue. So we have to resolve it in that way and come to some kind of operating procedures when it comes to ship visits, and how you know, what the process, what are the SOPs for ship visits. So that is at the moment under discussion. I think Sri Lanka is preparing a framework for that. There is a discussion going on that. But what is important is that there is communication, and both sides understand each other at the highest levels, because that's the only way this can be done. Once the SOPs are set up, then probably, hopefully, it can operate. But till the SOPs are set up, we have to make sure there is communication. I mean, there is no quick solution to this, I think.
So when President Wickramasinghe was here, there was some reports in the media that India laid out its security concerns very frankly to Mr. Vikramasinghe. So, and its red lines, and it drew some red lines. Are you at liberty to tell us what those red lines are?
I think I wouldn't want to look at this as red lines and amber or whatever colors we
Yeah,
are going
that's
to deal with.
newspaper way of putting it. But, yeah.
But basically, when leaders meet, geopolitical issues are discussed, security issues are discussed, and that is the dialogue that what I think we should encourage, until we can frame something. But I think to look at it in red lines or red light or even amber light or red lines or whatever, how we want to place it, I don't think that would make sense. But in always when leaders meet, they do discuss these things, definitely.
So I think, I have some more questions, but also there is, that we are running out of time, I think. So should I open it out to the floor? Yeah, so if anybody has questions, please raise your hand and I will call on you to ask your question. Yes, please identify yourself also.
Yeah, hello. I'm Monish with the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. You did mention, Ambassador, High Commissioner, in the beginning about the role of remittances in the Sri Lankan economy. And you did phrase it very well that, Sri Lanka is has been going through this economic rips, and it's a democracy with a society with, again, divides within it. My question is regarding, the credibility of the Sri Lankan system and the government, and the perception among the Sri Lankan diaspora. What do they think, and what is their perception of what has underwent in Sri Lanka in the last, the kind of crisis that we have seen, and what has been their overtures towards this, how helpful they have been, and how critical they have been of systemic corruption and other things which comes up as issues when we talk about Sri Lanka. Thank you so much.
Basically, our diaspora is, the migrant workers are primarily a singular diaspora. We have about 1 million migrant workers working in the Middle East, in East Asia, but by and large in the Middle East, and also possibly in some countries in Europe. They are basically remitting money back to their families, and when the economic crisis struck, when the rupee was being devalued, it was depreciating very fast. Of course, they were watching to see the situation. Now those remittances are coming up. So the bulk of the $7.5 billion I mentioned is that. Then you have another diaspora, that is the Tamil diaspora who left during the war. That's also around 1 million, mostly in North America, Europe, and also in Australia. They are also remitting money to the north, where their families are. Of course, the dynamics of that diaspora are different because they left under traumatic circumstances. These families left, so therefore they have a different way of working. So that's how the two are split. The bulk of the money I'm talking about were coming from the migrant workers in the Middle East and elsewhere. So that dropped during COVID. It dropped because the number of migrant workers came back. Then when the migrant workers started to go back for work, the depreciation of the rupee took place. There was a slowdown, but I can see it slowly coming up now again. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to go back to 7.5 billion immediately, but it is working its way up. The government on a monthly basis is monitoring it and pushing for it. When it comes to perceptions that you are talking of, I think the Tamil diaspora is where we have to build confidence, not only for remittances, but for investment, because there are many Tamil citizens who have gone out there who are doing well, and some of them are coming back now. They are investing, they are engaging in philanthropy. Some very wealthy Tamils have come back and they have begun to make investments. So that is happening, despite the politics of what is going on one side, the there is an interest on the part of the diaspora in investing. So that is an area our current president has set up a separate office to manage the diaspora aspect also and to encourage diaspora investment. So these are two different niches or segments, really.
Any other questions? Yeah, Rani?
Sorry.
Excellency, I was wondering if you could give us a sense of how Sri Lanka has restructured its debt to China, because that is quite a bit of the debt burden that you carry.
So on, if you look at our debt, so that one gets an idea of the breakup, I have it in my head, but I'm getting a bit lazy or forgetful, I think. But the debt that is being treated, if you will, is something like $29.5 billion, roughly $30 billion. Now, of that, if you look at China, bilaterally, the Chinese government has given $3 billion. And the CDB, which is the Chinese Development Bank, has given $2.7 billion. So that's out of 30 billion. Then if you look at the private creditors, CDB is 2.7 billion. And what we call international sovereign bonds, which are mostly held by Western creditors in New York, London, etc., form of bonds, they hold $12.1 billion. Then if you, I'm just for sort of comparison purposes, China bilaterally is 3 billion, Paris Club is 2.4 billion, India is 1.6 billion. This is the debt being treated, because what India lent us in the last year is not part of this arrangement. So the question you're asking is the Chinese aspect of this. For China, they have always looked at this process differently, clearly, because they feel that the traditional Bretton Woods structures, which includes the Paris Club arrangement, is something that they are not comfortable with, because I think they feel that if they touch this in one place, they have financing all across the globe, and they don't want to set precedents anywhere. So, for example, when we had to present the letter of financing assurances, because the IMF, as you know, work out a debt sustainability framework, and they then give it to the creditors and say, this is our debt sustainability framework. They ask the sovereign lenders to agree to the framework. India was the first to agree by providing a letter. Paris Club followed. But China was slower, because for no other reason than the fact that they are not comfortable with this arrangement. But they provided a letter that was sufficient for the IMF to proceed to the next stage. So now the rest of the discussions are going on. Now, how it will end, I cannot predict, because, for example, there are debates, for example, how do you treat the CDB loans? Because they are treated as private creditors here. Now, private creditors are taking a haircut, possibly of, I don't know, well over 20%. I don't know, I can't. But so, whereas sovereign creditors will not take that deep haircuts. So, these are issues which are being discussed. And I think it will take a few months more for this to get sorted out. So, there's no point speculating. But I know everybody is watching that. And I understand the Chinese position, because if they do something in Sri Lanka, they will have to replicate it across the world. So that is the process. But we are encouraged by the fact that they did provide that first letter to the satisfaction of the IMF. So that was the encouraging sign. But still, this is not done yet.
Right. Vasudha Sondi, the back.
I'm Vasudha Sondi, and I run a tourism business, tourism marketing business. We primarily provide strategic help to national tourism boards to achieve their objectives from the India market. And considering that Sri Lanka has a target of 2 million travelers from India this year, I think it's proving to be a little ambitious. India, as you may already know, for the last year and this year, and probably for the next 2 years, is going to be the most sought after source market for any country in the world that wants tourism. And in the face of this, why is it that Sri Lanka does not have a tourism office to make its marketing and visibility a little more consistent in the source market?
I'm now getting into areas that I'm really trespassing here, but see, this idea of opening offices, and this is a personal view. So, when I was tourism minister, this was many moons ago, 2007, 2008 period, there was a huge debate over whether one should open one's own offices or whether one should retain companies in those countries to do the promotion. And during my time, we had an office in Paris, we had an office in Frankfurt, and an office in London. And I actually closed down the two, Paris and Frankfurt, and we retained promotion companies. And that was seen to be the most effective way of doing it, given the dollars that we were able to spend. Now, I think probably there is a line of thinking even now that it is better to retain specialists in those countries who understand those markets, maybe companies like yours probably, and also digital marketing, which is obviously the way forward. So, I'm not part of that decision-making process, and I don't like to backseat drive, especially having held office years ago. But my assumption is that the idea, because I know one thing, as a High Commissioner, I don't think High Commissions are good at promoting tourism, because we are bureaucratic organizations, and I come from the private sector. Originally, my idea is get other people to do as much as possible and basically act as a catalyst. So I think that is the logic, that I think the Ministry of Tourism has selected various companies to do this. And they are doing that. Our minister has also traveled there, I know, and that process is ongoing. I think that is the way that they are trying to do it. Whether that's the best way to do it or not, that debate, I don't know, because when I was in charge, I felt having officers was too much of an overhead. But maybe things have changed now, I don't know.
Yes.
Thank you for your insights, High Commissioner. Food insecurity is another concern, especially in the context of market fluctuations. So, in your view, what more can India do to enhance cooperation in this segment? Thank you.
No, I think, we need access, because sometimes what happens, the times when we need various supplies, you yourself have issues. So you have export bans sometimes. So that is a challenge. We understand that. But so far, whenever we have required support, India has provided it, and there was a $1 billion line of credit provided for us also. But getting that access is important. But then you have your own domestic pressures as well. We understand that, but equally we would like to. Now we are going through a drought in Sri Lanka at the moment. There is a fear of this El Nino effect, that there may be a flood afterwards, and our crop is, at the moment, there is some uncertainty about our rice crop and other crops. So if that were to happen, obviously we would like that support. Going into a different area, I was also looking at some of your programs, like for providing midday meals, children's meals, Akshayapatra, for example. I visited them to study that, because I think those are good role models for us also, of sort of best practices, if we can work with, because we need to think of that aspect as well. The broader food security issue is there, but also to ensure that, especially school kids, because now among children, the malnutrition issue is serious. UNICEF has also pointed it out. And I was very impressed with some of the programs you have, like Akshayapatra one in particular, but I've seen some others as well. So we are trying to see whether some of these programs can be replicated, whether we can get the local Sri Lankan private sector to support it, because you have a tradition, I think, of the private sector supporting programs like this. So that's another aspect.
Any other questions from the audience? I have a question that I left till the end, which is about the Tamil question. Not because I'm Tamil, but
No, no, I
because
know, I know.
it's a question. There was no formal written reference to this aspect of the bilateral relationship, because it is part of the bilateral relationship, or to the 13th Amendment, which was introduced at India's intervention in 1987. In any of the formal documents that came out of President Vikramasinghe's visit. But Prime Minister Modi did speak at length about it, length in that context. So how do you see this? Has the India-Sri Lanka relationship moved beyond this question, or do you see, because Mr. Modi made a reference to it, do you think it's still something that is relevant in Tamil Nadu for the centre's relationship with Tamil Nadu, for its own political aspirations in Tamil Nadu? How do you see this playing out in the India-Sri Lanka relations, and why has Sri Lanka been has not been quick enough with this whole 13th Amendment business, although it's in your constitution? Is there a danger that it may be removed from the constitution? And then what happens to India-Sri Lanka relations?
Well, I think, as you said, Prime Minister Modi mentioned it. President also, in his statement, he referred to the reconciliation process and the proposals he had brought forward. Basically, this problem, in my view, we have to find a way of resolving as Sri Lankans, but we have not been able to resolve it. I mean, for the past 30, 40 years, this has been a matter for discussion. Since independence, it has
and
been
it's
a matter.
15 years since the war ended.
Exactly. So, our society is polarized. That's the reality. I mean, your society is polarized, the American society is polarized, Italy is polarized, the UK is polarized. And I think we have to find a democratic solution. How do we build that consensus? It has to be built in Parliament. That is the only body we have to build that consensus. The President has been very clear that he would like to build the consensus if it's possible. If it cannot be done on this round, it has to be a democratic process. There is no other way of managing it. And it is an issue. I was involved with the peace process in 2001. I mean, I have a whole history with this. But at the end of the day, we have to find a democratic way of doing it. The President has made some proposals. Obviously, the 13th Amendment is in the Constitution. Some people like it, some people don't, but it is there, and I don't think it's about to go away. But how do you implement it is where the debate is. The President has made a proposal saying he's willing to implement everything except police powers. In my view, there must be pragmatism on both sides. Start somewhere and start moving, because if you're going to stick to a line, that's not going to be helpful.
What is that pragmatism?
Well, I think what is on the table should be accepted, and then you start moving to the next step. That's pragmatism. If you wait for exactly a perfect solution, I don't think we will ever get one, because democracy is an untidy process. Our society, I think, is particularly polarized that way. You have lived through it, I have lived through it. And so that's my view. To set up a theoretical framework and hold on to it. I think I quote Goethe to people sometime in Faust. He, at one stage, I think Mephistopheles says, theory is grey, my friend, the tree of life is green. So I think we have to live in the green and in the reality. I think that's, at least my view. This is a personal comment I'm making, because we have to address it. There is no doubt about it. The President's proposals, on one side, he has made certain proposals vis-a-vis the 13th Amendment. He has also made some far-reaching proposals on development. Now, I think both should again go hand in hand. There is a perception in some political, I think among some politicians, especially in the North and the East, that the development agenda should wait sometimes for the perfect model. I don't think we are doing a service that way to the citizens of Sri Lanka, whether you are living in the north or anywhere else. This is my personal view. So we have to start someplace. That's my view. I mean, otherwise we will keep on talking about this forever, I think.
Just one last question. Indrani raised the issue of the debt restructuring. Is there a deadline by which it has to be done? Is there, does the IMF, has it laid down a deadline by which this restructuring has to be completed?
By the end of the year, I mean, the deadline meaning is that the understanding is by the end of the year we have to do that, because we can't, the foreign debtor, the creditors are not going to wait forever for us to begin to pay back. So I think, but as I can see it now, there is some consensus among the private creditors, but they make decisions based on basically how they assess their risk. So now the sovereign debtors, also creditors rather, have to make up their minds, and then you have to put it together, because at the moment we are not paying any debt back, so people are not going to wait forever. So I think the end of the year is probably the target. I mean, hopefully before that. But deadline.
And what are the Chinese saying about it?
Well, at the moment, there is still
They're
a
not
discussion going on. No, there is a conversation. The IMF is in touch. Our people are in touch. We will have to see, because so far there has been no reason to think that it is negative. Let's put it that way. So we will have to see what happens. Because this is, I mean, everybody keeps asking about the Chinese. It is new to them. That we have to understand. I mean, they have their own concerns. I mean, we can argue that about the Bretton Woods structure. So they feel that they are being cornered within that framework. So far they have come along up to a point. So now we have to see where that moves. I mean, I can't really predict this. I mean, that I can't make a prediction.
Okay. So I think with that, we will wind down this session. It was very insightful. Your comments were threw a lot of light on many of the questions in the India-Sri Lanka relationship, as well as in the situation on Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, High Commissioner Moragoda, for spending this time here with us and answering all our questions. Thank you so much.
All your questions part is okay, is it? Or are you being polite? Anyway, thank you, Rupa, for sparing the time, and Indrani also for inviting me, and all of you for joining. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you all for coming to our session today. We have the Ambassador series fairly regularly. We try and do it once every month. But all ambassadors are even busier than we are. So, but we hope to see you in the next one. Thanks.
Thank you.
No, mostly in Chennai. Yeah, now I left the express also.